Welcome to the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast, a space where all spiritual seekers are honored and celebrated. This podcast was born from the journeys of your hosts, who have each faced her own dark night of the soul, but they've emerged with an unshakable belief in divine connection, cosmic inspiration, and her true life's calling. Join us on a journey of personal growth, transformation, and magical self-discovery. Your first co-host is Chloe Brown, a gifted intuitive empath and shadow work life coach. Your second co-host is Chione Starr, an intuitive energy worker and acclaimed past life regressionist. The Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast starts now. Welcome to today's episode. We're digging into the spiritual impact of money, what it means to us, what it means we are enabled and empowered to do with it. And we're first identifying and then deconstructing some of our belief systems around money to continue further personal growth. I'm Chione.
And Chloe here.
And Chloe, I think it was interesting the way that this topic even came about, because what are the 3 rules you never discuss in a group setting or unless it's with someone you're super, super close to, right? Politics, religion, and finances, right. And it was during one of our earlier episodes where you were talking about your upbringing, that you had mentioned that you were raised with the ideology that having money was innately evil, and also that people who had money, or whatever that meant to you, meant that they were innately evil or taking advantage of person that doesn't have money. Have I characterized that correctly?
100%.
We got to talking about this because I had grown up with a completely opposite. And when I say polar opposite, I'm talking Chloe's North Pole, I'm South Pole, and then even more south than that. Idea about money and what it means to work for money and what it means to have and save money. And so we wanted to dig into not just our different belief systems, but also how that impacted our personal, financial, and, well, I can say professional as well as spiritual growth. My husband loves stocks. He loves mutual funds. I know what a REIT is. I can tell you all about the telecom industry in Bolivia. But he even tells me that the emotional attachment to especially losing money is sometimes so great that people walk away from, in their minds, fortunes because they just can't hang with a statistic to see a stock through once it starts to drop. And so all of these conversations around the emotional attachment to money, the spiritual and personal attachment that Chloe and I have to money really made us think that this would be an interesting topic to dig into. And so the first thing I wanted to ask Chloe is to explain a little bit more about this mindset that you grew up with and where you think that originated.
Growing up, the takeaway often was there was a lot of people who had money that could help if they chose to, but because they had money, they had better things to do with their money. And I'm sure in some way that was articulated. The lifestyle we lived, gypsy style, and referenced how much we moved. There was a lot of crime and a lot of what I would not deem as morally integral way of living. And their target often was very rich individuals, whether it was their plan being to try to hijack and steal their helicopter, as ignorant as that sounds, that authentically did happen, or manipulate them to think that my mom was in love with them and liquidating all of their things. And by that, I mean stealing and then disappearing. And so we would move from state to state. And I think the subcontext of all of that was not lost on me, that it was always the people who had all of those things who at a younger age I was told that they could help us if they chose to, but they chose not to. And then as I was getting older, I was seeing essentially them stealing from people who had the money. And so it created this very palpable hatred for money. I could feel the divide even at a young age, that money as I saw it, which I now recognize more as capitalism as we talk about it, but at a young age, I just saw it as money. And so I believed deeply until I did a lot of shadow work in the last several years on this specifically. It was the people who had the money, them evil, because the money itself was evil, almost like it was cancer. It spreads, or the rotten potato in a bag, it spreads. And that's truly how I visualized it and felt it.
Your mother specifically targeted individuals who she perceived had money, a certain amount, I presume, to be rich enough to then say, okay, they have it, they don't deserve it, so therefore I do. At first, it sounded like this was a Robin Hood story, take from the rich and give to the poor, but I'm not hearing that part of it. So are you
No,
saying that she just felt entitled or just believed that they had it and she wanted it, therefore go get it? Hmm.
I think that's it. And I think when you factor in real life situations like trauma and mental illness and survival mode, I think all of those things would account for, yes, I think for her, what deemed as rich enough, which I think is a great question in itself, was doctors and lawyers. Those were her targets pretty regularly. They had their crap together. They had the money, and did they deserve it? No, they were corrupt and they didn't stand for what was right in the name of justice like they should. That was the context. That might be divulging a bit too much about my personal life, but that is transparency and vulnerability right there.
I appreciate that. That's a hard thing to admit that that's a close family member that
Was a close family member. Yeah.
was a close family member that behaved in a way that you now have such misgivings about and can see it for what it is. I guess what I'm hearing you say is because a doctor or a lawyer that she had targeted had money, because money made them evil, it was okay for her to take it.
Right. Right.
Interesting.
And I think to go full circle, that's why Michelle's story was so powerful for me, because it did directly speak to my childhood and the belief structure I was given and used before I restructured it into my own belief system.
I think that's a good point to bring up because the Michelle that Chloe is referencing is one of the episodes where we speak to Michelle Lee having been a lawyer after growing up so impoverished as a way in her mind to help improve her situation. And then using her education that she paid so dearly for to help people who had been wronged or she felt needed justice. The irony that your mom would have potentially targeted someone who had spent all of their time and energy and money to escape an impoverished childhood. That's interesting.
Yeah, very much. And I think what's a bit more interesting about it is that as somebody who was self-proclaimed an atheist so often growing up, it's interesting that she would reference the Bible all the time about the Bible phrase of money is the root of all evil. For me, as I've discussed in previous episodes, somebody who was constantly seeking safety and community, and I did that through trying to find different religious sections that spoke to my soul. Even though she claimed to be an atheist, it was her way of being able to manipulate me in a way that did speak to me because I was looking at the different churches. And so by her showing me in the Bible that God says the money is the root of all evil, in my child brain, I thought, well, then my mom must be right. Because don't we all want our parents to be right? I mean, until we hit teenage years, of course.
And then we know they're not. Right.
Yes.
When we started talking about this just between ourselves, and I was digging into the belief system that you have been raised with around money, and it had been used biblically. That is funny. I did not know that your mother had been a self-proclaimed atheist and then used biblical
Yeah.
reference as a way
Hmm.
to, I guess, justify her actions. But to that point, while your mother had those perceptions around money being evil, I will say, once you and I had this discussion, I opened my eyes to some of the rhetoric that exists out on social in the spiritual community itself, and realized that either I had been ridiculously naive or blind or both, but I just assumed when I saw similar commentary to what you shared that people were talking about the upper 1%, the king of Dubai, the king of Jordan, who owns 75% or whatever the number is of the oil that fuels the world. I thought people were talking about these people who had so much money and it was part of their familial lineage that they were so removed from the human suffering that we pass on a daily basis that it was a way of saying, wake up, uber rich people, take a care in your common man and realize that you sitting on billions and billions and billions of dollars makes you have plenty. So why not help alleviate that suffering? That's what I thought that commentary meant. But the more I'm seeing and hearing from people who say things like that, the more I'm realizing that it is the doctor, it is the lawyer. There is a perception out there that people, regardless of how hard they've worked for it, regardless of where they've come from, regardless of how overextended they may be in the hole and living day to day by very large paycheck by paycheck, but at any given moment may lose it all. That regardless of all of that, those mindsets are still prevalent. And just to characterize the way I grew up, very poor. My mother tells me that we were poor, but she grew up on the res. So she says she knows true poverty, where people did not have any food and they ate stray animals when they were super desperate. And she remembers growing up, and at one kitchen table, they didn't even have enough chairs for the entire family to sit. So they nor did they have enough food. So it worked out well. I guess whoever got the chairs that fit around the table were the ones that got to eat. I'm not sure quite how that worked. But
Maybe that's where musical chairs came from originally.
Maybe it is. But her stance was you get out of poverty, you do the best you can to get educated and to learn something that in our Western culture is valued financially. And you
Interesting.
never repeat those mistakes again. You don't have to eat a stray dog when you're hungry. You can always have a skill or should always have a skill that you can rely on to keep yourself out of poverty. What we grew up with was a work ethic that wouldn't quit.
That's so interesting because my mother also grew up on a reservation, and I can see the correlation. It's like the siblings who turn out polar opposite. Even if they're twins, you always are wondering, how did that happen? And I think that's the same idea. My mother, who I usually don't use those words for, and also spoke of similar things. I think there was 9 or 11 of them. So very similar stories. Her takeaway was the same type of work ethic. However, when it came to education, is that it's a giant front and it's a giant casino game that's set up for failure. The odds are against you, and it's literally only there to take your money. It's just a waste of paper. Ironically enough, she believed that way about marriage, but that's a whole nother conversation. So, with that thought process, I can see the similarities. The work ethic was there. The intention was there. It was misguided at best.
She felt that education was a potential setup for failure. Then I think what she was really saying, it was very expensive and she couldn't afford it anyway.
As an adult, I would agree with that. But in your child brain, it's ingrained. That's what your parents are telling you. And so I definitely was always afraid of people who have strong knowledge and memory skills, because that's something I lack, regardless of how much I study. My amygdala is filled, and we're working on that. Also, people who had money, because to me, that must mean they're evil, and I've already experienced enough of that. Also, people who had an education, because the way I interpreted the belief structure out of childhood was that they were, oh gosh, this is going to sound terrible, and I apologize in advance. They were double fucked because they had the money and the casino game. So they're getting all that money, but they're dumping all their money into something that's not valuable enough. And going back to the lawyer as the example, as somebody who was constantly running from the law, she believed that these lawyers were just as corrupt as her. The only difference is they played the casino game, so they get a free hall pass, essentially. And because they have money, they get a double hall pass. And that's the root of it, I guess, in short.
Wow. That is completely opposite than the way I was raised. For pretty much all of it, we knew it was extremely expensive to be educated, and we were really encouraged to do our utmost in school to the extent that we could qualify for any scholarships, for any grants that would help offset those costs. We should avail ourselves of it. And at the end of the day, we did the best that we could. But part of the problem when you're very poor is you don't know how to navigate, which is what I feel like your mom was saying without explaining. Part of being very poor and being the first people in my sisters and my case of going to college in our family was that people do not know how to navigate that system of how to get financial aid, of how to offset those costs with work, study, and all kinds of things that she and I learned the hard way and 30 years later of paying on student loans. So we did the best we could. We took out loans and we just worked. And as I mentioned, paid off those loans eventually and are finally free of it 30 some years later. But by virtue of being in a higher educational system. It changes the way you're able to think, even if you're a terrible college student.
I agree, actually. I do, as an adult, I do agree now. However, in full transparency, I just got to that point. In fact, when I first met you in the container we all participated in, I think at some point I openly did share how freaked out I was because I think I was the only one in there without a degree. I'm somebody who barely got through high school, and my teachers only helped me get through high school because they knew I needed to get out of that family and away from those people. So they just floated me. Even though I did spend a lot of years working towards my criminal justice bachelor's degree, I never truly processed that or acknowledged that hard work that I did. And so that underlying message of you're not enough or you're not smart enough to have intelligent conversations was so deeply rooted. I mean, anybody who's looked at my astrology chart knows I do not enjoy superficial conversation. So it's hard to have deep conversations when you feel undereducated and you have all of these underlying self narratives that are not working towards my benefit. And so it was not until I submerged myself with so many amazing people who I knew and valued and trusted before I knew about all the little letters and dots after their names that really helped me understand it's not the money that's evil or makes people evil. It's money in the hands of rotten people. Give it rotten money because I don't actually believe in demons anymore. But I heard this quote that I think changed me forever. And I truly wish I knew where it came from. It said, the more money there is in the hands of good people, the more good there can be done in this world. That really helped me understand and dissect the narrative that I had still been working with that was not working for me and understand it was not the money, it was the people who had that money. And perhaps I'm only, air quotes, looking at the top 5% or 10% in America, and I wasn't giving people a fair opportunity. But yet I'd get so angry when people wouldn't give me a fair opportunity because let's use the example that I didn't have the degree. So how could I be that upset with them if they did have a degree or they did have money, especially if they worked for that money? Who am I? Who am I to say that? That's terrible. And I don't want to be one of those people. I want to uplift. So I had to really dissect. I didn't know I had such troublesome narratives for years, decades, even multiple decades. It's not how old I am, but at least 3 decades. So
At the end of the day, isn't the whole point of our human experience to identify and then deconstruct those belief systems that don't serve us? And you said it while you were speaking about education and money in general. But I think at the bottom line, your feeling worthy is the point. And I guarantee that there are many of us that don't feel worthy. If we're in a group of people and we believe that we are not as wealthy as them, or as smart as them, or not as papered as them, that we are not as valuable. I specifically did not seek an education to become a valuable person. I sought an education to become a valuable worker. And I question now, if I had had a different mindset then, maybe I would have been a better student at time. Maybe if I had looked at it instead of becoming somebody who's hireable and instead looked at it as someone who used that mind opening experience of learning so many different things process these people that I could have become a more well-rounded person instead of my focusing simply on how hireable I would be and what kind of money that would command. And so while I never had the thought process that you did and did not grow up with that belief system, there was a part of me that bought into that because I was looking to get that piece of paper and get out so I could start making money and not have to worry anymore because I have spent most of my childhood and a large part of my young adulthood worrying about money. And I was sick of it.
And I think that was the root for me of all of my anger because I couldn't understand the difference. Because to me, I had poured myself into being a hard worker. I had served my country. I didn't do drugs and alcohol. I didn't hurt people. I didn't lie, cheat, and steal. So I was so damn angry when people weren't, oh, you're amazing. Let's hire you right now. Because to me, I had climbed Mount Everest just to be alive. And so the disconnect was it's because they have all these letters and dots after their name that they think they're better. And in the root of all of it is because I did not believe in myself enough to know better and to see my value. I was constantly trying to prove my value and get validation.
Well, I think when we grow up with a mindset that, like your mom thought, this person over here who has, and I don't know what her financial EBITDA was, her bottom line was, whether they were in the black or in the red. I don't know what that was, but whatever in her mind told her that someone had enough for her to take, I think the bottom line message is that they don't deserve it. And so I'm taking it from them. And she, if I understand, is not a wealthy individual. What happened to all of the things that she took that didn't belong to her? Did she invest them? Did she save them? Did she sell them and take what she made on the black market? I mean, I'm just making things up. I don't identify with that lifestyle. So I don't know what you do with what you have.
I think the best way to answer this would be, and not to keep repeating myself, is to remember that we lived a gypsy lifestyle. So it was on the run all the time with not very much belongings. In fact, I learned at a very young age when she said, hey, do you want to go on a road trip? That meant take your dog because you're never coming back. Material things never, ever made it, which that's a whole nother podcast in itself, quite frankly. Attachment and disassociation with materialistic things. But anyway, so no, they never ever went anywhere with us. What I will say is I think she was so smart in all the wrong ways that she already had buyers lined up, I think is the best way of saying it. So I would say it probably got sold. Where the money went, I would assume, would be to the next road trip, if we're being real, and perhaps some addictions along the way. I think also something that is noteworthy to mention is that when I was going to college for the criminal justice degree,
Which is ironic.
well, it was to pass time while I was overseas in the military. I like to be very busy. In this case, I knew I wasn't going to be able to go on any deployments because I was the only female. I decided, well, fine, I will take a few college classes. And honestly, it's because I thought the instructor was the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And in real life, probably my very first girl crush. So it was not for valid reasons.
Or
Nonetheless,
does Jennifer Aniston know this?
or Julia Roberts, or Sandra Bullock, my girl crushes. So anyway, I digress. So I think during those classes, we also were always doing true crime reports. It was my true crime event that I was reporting on regularly, which a lot of people will recognize this, was the Scott Peterson case. Not specifically just that case, but throughout other cases people were talking about, there was a common theme of money controls justice. Sometimes that looked like there wasn't enough money to do what was at that time available for DNA testing. Sometimes it was they had all the money in the world to post their bail and then they come up missing. And sometimes it was corruption from the top down, and it was all about who was getting money in their pockets. And then we learned about the jail system getting privatized, and it was all about money going into somebody's pockets. And now I recognize that as capitalism, thanks to my very beautiful, educated friend of mine, also known as Chione. At the time, it just fed the narrative of what I was raised with. And so it just kept solidifying, I guess you could say, this awful narrative that money was evil. So I think that was really important to mention as well. Growing up, I always understood my parents' philosophy didn't resonate with me. But when the military and my college experience kept kind of showing me the same thing over and over.
It's super interesting in the spiritual world because we're talking about the obviously the impact, not just our belief systems growing up and what that means to the education we did or didn't pursue and why, and our own value system, having enough was where I put value so that I didn't have to worry about how I was going to make my rent, how I was going to eat, how I was going to be able to then, when I had a family, make sure my children had enough to eat, daycare, all of that good stuff. So when I think to the impact that this capitalistic society that we live in has on our self worth and our spiritual growth, it made sense to me why the Buddhists or the Catholic nuns and brothers and so many of the other types of religions would forego material items and would forego even unique clothing and instead adopt either a habit or a robe or whatever the aesthetic culture called for at that time. And I think that in and of itself also would bolster your mother's opinion that look, even they give up everything. They give up all of their valuables, they give up all of their worldly possessions to become married to the church or to become part of the Buddhist convent that they joined, therefore live spiritual lives. And so I started to kind of look at that perspective also and think about what a dichotomy it was for Siddhartha Gautama. Hopefully I said that right. Anyway, that left the palace to go out and sit under a Bodhi tree, who
Yeah.
had been learning from ascetics who had nothing. And he said, I am sitting here until I become enlightened. And he had to rely on people bringing him food. So he walked away from all of the riches and he realized that he had been sheltered from all the suffering, that he was with all of the riches, all of the pleasures, all of the entertainment, money, and class could buy. And when I started thinking about that and how there is this worldview that capitalism or money is a corrosive element in the wrong hands, it started to make sense to me how you were raised with that belief system. So then I started thinking about my own pursuits and how I had done everything in my power to never be impoverished again. And I was also looking not just on a professional career path, but also looking to enhance my life with providing spiritual services and then questioning whether I should charge for those when I knew that the amount of investment I needed to learn some of these modalities wasn't cheap. And so I had to question my own motives and my own value. in pursuing a lot of these things. When you are in a capitalistic society where money can buy you external freedom and happiness, escapism, education, nice cars, nice homes, anything that you can possibly imagine, presumably happiness, at least lack of worry about those material things, which can help towards happiness. The impact on my spirit and on my self value then became even more in question as I thought about whether I should and could charge for some of those services. When I realized that my value is tied to my spiritual being, it became very clear to me that all of us were already worthy. What we put a price tag on had nothing to do with anything except how we make a living in order to afford the things we want or need in this world. And it became super clear to me.
Yeah. For me, it was a little bit different, but I do agree with that same thought process. Can you live happy and be poor? And I had to think about this question a lot because that's where the intersection was. I do believe you can be happy without money. I've seen it in third world countries firsthand. So coming back to America, in our country and how things work, I couldn't understand why I couldn't equally be happy without the materialistic things in life until I realized that those third world countries, it's different. You can't try to make something work in our country that works in other countries. You can't put a square in a round peg, as they say. So that for me is where the crossing was and recognizing, okay, so if I can't control that, I can control what country I live in. So my knee-jerk response was to run, to hide, move countries. But instead, I'm trying to grow roots and be proud of my American culture to the best of my ability anyway, especially in now. For me, where is my value and what does that mean? And now, for example, when I go get a tarot reading, a mediumship reading, or a past life regression, instead of thinking, oh my gosh, they charge what? Now I think, oh my God, could you imagine footing the bill to learn all of them? I will just pay for the session because that's way cheaper and I get the best of both worlds. And it changed my perspective on things. Now it's not that person thinks they're so good because look how much they charge. They are so much better than me, is how I interpreted it. Now I look at it as they valued themselves, they invested in themselves, and I'm buying into that education, whether it's from a book or real life experience. It doesn't matter to me.
I agree. Look how far we've come to realizing that one way in which we speak to our self value, at least in this Western culture, is to put a fair price tag on something and to have what in the spiritual world we call an energetic exchange.
Hmm.
That's our financial transaction.
Hmm.
And there are times when we hear, oh no, this is very expensive, or oh, I wish I could afford to do that, that I personally want to say, "Ah, I wish I could make something less expensive, but when you're spending at least 4 hours of your time, at least I was specific, if we use a QHHT session as an example, in addition to the other things that you're going to get as part and parcel of this service, I think, don't do that. Don't devalue the service because the service deserves this much in financial investment. It's not an indictment on you. It's not a greed factor for you to charge this much. It's a way of, if nothing else, breaking even on the investment that you've made. And that was a very different way of looking at things for me. when I first came into the spiritual community and looking at how people valued themselves, valued their services, and also what they thought that their human existence in and of itself should be valued as. And I don't think any of us are saying, at least you and I aren't saying, that our humanity has a price tag.
No, I believe that we're here for those experiences. So, although our country has made everything have a price tag, that's not how I personally see things. In fact, like we've talked about off recording multiple times, I believe heavily in energy exchange and skill trades. And perhaps that was the blue collar way that I grew up, but I am that person who gets sticker shock on anything over $20. If there's a comma after it, I'm probably going to have a panic attack. And if the person who's offering said services sees or feels that energy, I can only speak for myself, but it has nothing to do with the service or the person in my case and scenarios. It had everything to do with me not feeling like it's even an option because of the progress of where I am in this whole conversation, bringing it back to the front.
I think the bottom line problem that many of us have in the capitalistic society is that there is an idea, and we see it in the political climate as well, regardless of where we fall on politics, whether we're extremely conservative, extremely liberal, or anywhere in between. I think the idea that when you live in a capitalistic society, which simply means that companies' goal is to make a profit. That's it. That's all capitalism means.
Like our jail systems, sadly.
In the very bottom line definition, it simply means having ownership and working toward a profit. The idea that makes that corruptible is that if I have a profit, you don't. I'm tearing down that part of the unsaid definition because nowhere does it say if I make a profit, you don't, or I'm taking it from somebody who doesn't have it. I think if we change our mindset and reframe what profit is, then we can all profit. And to that specific quote about putting money in the hands of people who intend to do good, that's not saying that we're taking it from one person or Robin Hood stealing from the rich to give to the poor. It's simply saying putting the money in the hands of someone who intends to do good will continue to spread the profit to others who will also do good with it.
Right. Which kind of ties into the unspoken thought process of there's not enough. So that for some reason, at least in my mind, I would get concerned that if I take somebody's money or if I'm living in abundance, I'm taking from somebody else. And I don't think I need to go deep into that, but I think that you mentioning that is powerful because it's not this chest of gold coins and everybody gets two or these people get 10 and these people get none. It's not, I don't believe that it has to be that way. I believe that we can all live in abundance financially and internally without taking from others. I believe, call it utopian, but I do believe that could be a major change.
I agree. I think we need an invocation for abundance across the board. Hmm.
I do agree, Keone. I think an abundance invocation would be really good for every one of us and our listeners. I open my heart to the infinite flow of abundance. I am aligned with the energy of prosperity and I receive with gratitude all that is meant for me.
I wish every one of our listeners and their family members abundance, prosperity, gratitude, and love.
Mhm. Thanks for diving into the depths with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, show your support at buymeacoffee.com/mystical mermaid lounge, as every little ripple helps keep the magic flowing. Would you like some more deep, soul yearning conversations? Well, then swim on over to our sister podcast, Past Lives Cafe, where Chione deep dives into those past life experiences. Also, we'd love to hear from you. Please don't forget to rate and review and drop your feedback and comments at our website, mysticalmermaidlounge.buzzsprout.com. Thank you again so much, and don't forget to catch us at the next high tide. Bye bye.